In 897 AD, Rome's ruling class pulled off one of history's most surreal spectacles. They hauled a dead pope out of his grave, dressed him in holy robes, and set his corpse on trial before stunned clergy and nobles. But this was not madness. It was a desperate answer to chaos. What could drive churchmen to publicly desecrate the papacy itself? And how did Rome reach the point where humiliation became the only way to seize control? After the death of Emperor Charles the Fat in 888, the last Carolingian to rule a united empire, Italy splintered into a patchwork of rival kingdoms and fiefdoms. The old imperial order collapsed almost overnight. In the north, Arnulf of Carinthia claimed the imperial title, but his power barely reached beyond the Alps. Meanwhile, the Spoleto dynasty, led by Guy III and his son Lambert, tightened their grip on central Italy, determined to carve out their own dominion. In Rome itself, the papacy became the ultimate prize. With no strong emperor to keep order, Roman noble families and ambitious warlords saw the papal throne as their best tool for influence. The Annales Fuldenses record how, between 887 and 890 armed bands roamed the countryside, sacking towns and besieging cities. Each new crisis, whether famine, plague, or invasion, drove desperate men to seize whatever power they could. The city's ancient senate held little real sway, and the Pope's authority depended on which faction could muster the most swords. In this climate, the papal office changed hands with dizzying speed. Alliances shifted by the month. The burial of one pope was often the signal for the next to claim the keys of St. Peter. The vacuum left by the Carolingians drew in every opportunist, turning the papal seat into both a weapon and a shield in the struggle for control. Between 896 and 904, the papal throne became a revolving door. In just 8 years, 11 men claimed the title of pope. 10 were recognized by the church, and 1 was later dismissed as an anti-pope. Some reigned for only days. Boniface VI lasted barely 2 weeks before being forced out. Romanus was gone in 4 months. Theodore II's pontificate ended after less than 3 weeks. Even those who survived longer rarely found stability. Each new pope arrived amid street violence, bribery, or the threat of assassination. The city's chroniclers, writing in the margins of the Liber Pontificalis, could barely keep up with the names and dates. No rules or tradition seemed strong enough to keep factions from seizing the papacy for themselves. The old canon laws meant little when swords decided who wore the pallium. With every burial, the scramble for power began again. The papal office, once the bedrock of Christian order in Rome, had become a prize to be won and lost in the chaos. In this climate, even the most extreme measures could seem reasonable to desperate men seeking to erase their rivals and secure their own place atop the ruins. Formosus began his rise as Bishop of Porto, a skilled diplomat sent to Bulgaria and Constantinople, trusted by popes and emperors alike. His reputation for negotiation brought him into the heart of Rome's tangled politics, but it also made him enemies. In 876, he was excommunicated and forced into exile by Pope John VIII, accused of overreaching and of harboring ambitions for the papacy. Years later, Formosus returned from the margins, restored to favor, and in 891, he was elected pope. He stood at the center of the empire's collapse, crowning both Lambert of Spoleto and later Arnulf of Carinthia as emperors, actions that angered the Spoletan dynasty and left his loyalties under suspicion. Formosus died in April 896, leaving behind a city still split by rival claims. Stephen VI, by contrast, owed his rise to the Spoletan faction. Installed as pope in May 897, Stephen was a product of the same Roman nobility that had once driven Formosus into exile. His election was less a victory of faith than a calculation by those who wanted to erase Formosus's legacy. Where Formosus had navigated shifting alliances, Stephen's path was shaped by the need to prove himself to his backers. Both men became symbols. Formosus as the pope who crossed boundaries, Stephen as the judge determined to settle old scores. Their rivalry was not just personal. It was the embodiment of a city where every papal decision risked igniting a new conflict. Canon law, meant to protect the church from chaos, became the weapon for a dead man's prosecution. The indictment against Formosus drew its force from ancient rules, some dating back to the Council of Nicaea in 325. Canon 15 of that council strictly forbade a bishop from moving to another see, a law meant to prevent ambition from corrupting the hierarchy. Formosus had begun as Bishop of Porto, but accepted the papacy, a translation condemned by the letter of the law, even if custom sometimes bent under pressure. This, above all, became the foundation for the case. Stephen's lawyers reached for more. They accused Formosus of perjury, citing oaths sworn before God and man. Auxilius, a contemporary defender, later wrote that Formosus had promised never to seek the Roman throne, yet broke that promise when the papacy beckoned. The charge of simony, buying or selling church office, was also raised, though evidence for this was thin, more rumor than record. Each accusation was rooted in canon, but sharpened by political need. The charges were not just about personal failings. They were crafted to strip Formosus's acts of legitimacy and erase his influence from the church's memory. By turning the rules of faith into a legal arsenal, Stephen's court prepared to judge not just a man, but the very foundation of papal authority. In January 897, as dawn crept over Rome, a silent procession wound its way through the city's ancient streets. Soldiers, their faces set and eyes averted, carried a heavy sarcophagus from the tombs beneath St. Peter's. Inside lay the corpse of Formosus, dead for 9 months. The body, stiff with decay, was brought through torchlit corridors into the Lateran Basilica. Liutprand of Cremona would later write that the old pope's remains were lifted from the crypt, the air thick with the scent of damp stone and old incense. Clerics, some whispering prayers, others glancing nervously at Stephen VI, prepared the corpse for its final humiliation. The dead pope was dressed in papal vestments, robes yellowed and threadbare, pallium draped over shriveled shoulders, a ring forced onto a finger, now blackened by the grave. The procession moved with a grim purpose, each step echoing against marble floors. At the front, junior clergy carried candles, their flames flickering in the cold air. Behind, bishops and deacons followed, faces drawn and pale. At the heart of the basilica, the corpse was propped on the papal throne. The silence was broken only by the shuffling of feet and the low murmur of prayers. The body sat slumped, hands resting on its lap, the hollow sockets of its eyes fixed on nothing. Around it, the assembled clergy and Roman nobility gathered in tense anticipation, waiting for Stephen VI to begin the trial. In that moment, the boundaries between the living and the dead seemed to blur, and the city held its breath. A deacon's trembling voice echoed through the nave, reciting the charges: perjury, violating sacred canons, unlawfully seizing the papal throne. The corpse of Formosus, slumped in papal robes, offered no defense. Stephen VI presided, his words clipped and formal, demanding answers from the dead. At intervals, he barked questions. Why had Formosus, as Bishop of Porto, dared to claim the Roman See? Why had he broken his oath? The deacon, forced to answer for the corpse, stammered apologies, his hands shaking as he spoke the ritual formulas. The assembled clergy sat rigid, their faces pale in the torchlight, as Stephen pronounced judgment. The verdict was swift. Formosus was declared guilty on all counts. Assistants moved forward, stripping the pallium from his shoulders, tearing the ring from his withered finger. Stephen's voice rang out, ordering the ritual mutilation. According to the Acta and Liutprand's account, the 3 fingers of the right hand, the thumb, the index, and the middle were severed. These were the fingers used to bless, and they were cut to void every sacrament Formosus had performed. Bloodless flesh parted under the blade, the sound sharp in the silent basilica. The corpse, now stripped and mutilated, was dragged from the throne. No prayers marked the end. The body was carried through the basilica, out into the chill air, and buried in a grave set aside for foreigners. Days later, even this was not enough. Formosus's remains were exhumed again, weighted, and thrown into the Tiber. The river swallowed what was left, as if to erase him from the city forever. Power struggles still twist institutions in unpredictable ways. Even today, no office, sacred or secular, is immune from the risk of spectacle overtaking principle. The Cadaver Synod is a reminder. When politics trumps dignity, history rarely forgets. What echoes do we leave behind? Share your thoughts below.